Have you ever witnessed a bride or groom say, "I do not," at a wedding? While working in the wedding industry for over 17 years, we've hosted on average 140 weddings per year. 10 plus years ago, we had a wedding and the groom and his groomsmen arrived, taking pictures, joking around, guests all arrived, took their seats, and about 5 minutes before the wedding was supposed to start, the bride's limo pulled up to the chapel. The bride's father got out, walked inside the chapel, walked to the microphone and stated the wedding was called off. His daughter would not be getting married today. He directed myself and my staff to still feed and liquor up all the guests since he'd already paid for all 170 people and got back into the limo and left. I never heard what the reason was, but that was by far the most awkward event I ever managed. It was a joke, but he was too nervous and it didn't really work. Everyone that heard him called him a jackass that ruined his own wedding. I was humiliated for him. I was in attendance where the pastor says, "Repeat after me, for better or for worse," and the groom said, "For better and for better." Everyone chuckled, but there was a hint of honesty there. They divorced after 9 months. I had a friend who decided to have a whole staged scene at this moment, with a mini soap opera playing out in the middle of the wedding. A mutual friend who was pregnant stood up and said that the baby was the groom's, and her husband flipped out. All the wedding party had scripted lines like, "Shut up, Susan, you know you lost your chance with him after the disappearance of your mysterious twin sister." The bride and groom were all in on it. It took the rest of the people only a few lines to realize that this was a joke. Fun was had by all, until about 3 months later when the soap opera actually happened and she cheated on him with his friend. Groom said, "I don't." Awkward silence and then, "Ha, it was a joke," followed by a longer, more awkward silence. "Pranked ya." Yes, at my cousin's wedding. The bride suddenly backed out at the last second. The wedding was abruptly cancelled and we, the family of the groom, all went to a restaurant instead. The bride was kind of a B-word who was abusive towards my cousin and extorts him for his money, so we were all relieved that this happened. I guess bullet dodged, I suppose? Shame about the literal tens of thousands of dollars they'd probably spent up to that point, but what can you do? One of the times my father went to the altar after my mum had divorced him. He was what you'd call a serial groom. In any event, the wedding was being hosted at someone's house and they got in front of the minister and decided not to get married. But they were both drunks and there was a lot of booze stocked up and why let it all go to waste? So they decided to get crap show drunk and have a party. I don't remember her name as it would have been his 5th marriage at the time. He eventually hit marriage number 5, walked away from an engagement one more time and was engaged yet again when he died. Not exactly that, but an acquaintance of mine was getting married. A few days before the wedding, they realized they weren't going to make it as a couple. However, because everything was paid for, they agreed to go through with it. Apparently, they fooled people quite well, as a friend who was invited told me that they looked so in love, but I knew it was just an act. A few months later, they quietly went their separate ways. So I'm guessing they never signed anything to make the marriage official, they just had a party. That's a safe bet. Getting married takes paperwork, so if you just don't submit it, you're off the hook. My cousin did this, actually unbeknownst to his then-wife. They moved to a different state right after the ceremony and were going to file the paperwork there, and things immediately got kind of rocky. My cousin decided to just not submit the paperwork and didn't tell his wife. He kept trying to make it work. I think he did love her, but knew that she wasn't all in. When the wife finally decided to ask for a divorce about 6 months later, he was like, "Guess what? We don't have to pay." Before anyone goes, "Oh my god, what a prick," yes, my cousin is notoriously a D-bag, but he wasn't trying to screw her over or anything either. She had a lot of mental health problems and in hindsight, their lives needed to go in different directions. My cousin paid for her to resettle back home and finish her college degree while he did his own thing. My buddy was so nervous he blurted out, "I do," the first time the priest addressed him. Same thing happened at my cousin's wedding. It got a pretty good laugh from everybody, bride and groom got embarrassed and red-faced, and the bride continued to giggle from nervousness throughout the entire thing up until the actual I do's and kiss. Just adorable all round. Saw a guy who was too drunk to even say "I do." Amazingly, they went through with it. Split up 6 months later. Turns out he'd cheated on the bride the night before. Stay classy. There's no better way to celebrate the most important day of your relationship than by getting so drunk you don't remember any of it. I was at a wedding where the bride didn't turn up, was horribly awkward whilst the groom just refused to agree that she wasn't coming. We all sat there for over an hour waiting. We were taken through for drinks, and the groom and main members of the wedding party disappeared. Apologies were made by the staff, dinner was served for anyone who'd stuck around, and then we all went home. Bride had freaked out. Apparently she did still want to get married, but the groom refused to go through it all again. They're still together though. Yeah, the pastor got the bride's name wrong. The groom was like, "I do not." All was well though, everyone got a pretty good laugh out of it. Highlight of the entire ceremony. I know a wedding manager and he only witnessed it once, but the groom meant it as a joke. He had some sort of bet going. The bride got mad and ran out of church. I just picture this annoying 90s groom. "I do not." Then grinning and looking around for approval. It's pretty much Ace Ventura doing this in my mind. "Dude, it was a joke. Come back." Here in the Netherlands, if you say no, or maybe, or anything else that's not clearly an affirmation, even if it's clearly meant as a joke, the wedding is off, and the person leading the ceremony is legally obligated to leave the premise to make sure the wedding cannot be legally completed. This is to prevent forced marriages. All the bride or the groom has to do to make sure they're not getting married is to say no briefly. Nobody can force the marriage to continue after that. So in the Netherlands, the guy would have ruined the entire day and thus deserved all of the crap the bride could give him. I was at a wedding officiated by an ancient Catholic priest. He muddled his way through the ceremony but seemed to fall into the regular Sunday Mass rhythm, forgetting that this was a wedding. Eventually he started to say the "Our Father" in one of the last parts of the ceremony. The congregation, following along on our ceremony booklets, realizes something is wrong and start to rustle uncomfortably. Eventually, the best man went up to the priest and whispered in his ear. The priest was startled and muttered, "Oh, I forgot about that part." He then went on to ask the bride and groom if they actually wanted to get married. They both said, "I do." Next, he forgot the "You may kiss the bride" line, so we all waited uncomfortably again until my friend shouted, "Kiss!" They kissed, we clapped, and they all lived happily ever after. In conclusion, old priest forgets to ask bride and groom if they wanted to get married. They did. Not exactly. The couple was so emotional that they just couldn't answer. They're the sweetest of people who were burned so badly in previous marriages that when things finally went right for them, they both broke down a little. The priest made a little joke about love, let them calm down, and started that part of the ceremony all over again. I know it's not exactly "I do not," but when my parents got married and the priest said, "You may now kiss the bride," my dad said, "Do I have to?" At my wedding, when the pastor was done talking, he was like, "Steve, you can go ahead. Give her a kiss." It sounded freaking stupid, and I felt robbed that I didn't get the usual "You may kiss the bride" line. One of my friends is so uncomfortable with public affection that she and her husband high-fived instead of kissing. My aunt was with an abusive butthole and decided not to go through on the day of, and didn't show up. My grandfather went up and stood on the stage and said something along the lines of, "There won't be a wedding tonight, but stay for dinner and drinks on me." Maybe that contributed to a 100% more jovial atmosphere at the reception, if the woman was that unpleasant to be around. Hope the groom was okay though. Not my story, but I heard about a friend of my ex-girlfriend getting married about 3 days before the wedding. The girl her fiancé was cheating on her with showed up at her door. She was crying hysterically and said, "I can't let you marry him. He's been cheating on you for 2 years. Please don't marry him." But it got colder from there. The girl went through with everything until it was time for the vows, and when it was her turn to say "I do," she clasped her hands and said, "I do not." Everyone kind of uncomfortably chuckled, going, I wonder if they rehearsed this. When she goes, "I do not marry the man who has lied to my face for 2 years. I do not marry the man who crept out of my bedroom when I was asleep to the neighbor's apartment to crawl into bed with her. I do not marry the man who stands here with me, humiliating me, my friends, and my family on what was supposed to be my special day. I do not, in the eyes of the church, forgive this man nor take him to be mine." It seemed like the story was going to come to a head, but apparently she just walked away crying and none of the guests knew what to make of it all. Apparently there was tremendous confusion. As a wedding DJ, something like this is a personal nightmare of mine. I frequently play music for the ceremony and processional, and I would have no idea what to play after a scene like this. Maybe just some light jazz while everyone gathers their wits. Yes, my own sister did this at her wedding. She was marrying this guy basically just for his money, and she apparently found out his business was failing, and he was no longer a millionaire a few weeks before the ceremony. She wanted to embarrass him, so she did not call it off right away, and dropped the bomb at the last second. Sounds like she's an awful human being. She is. Tell her I hate her. Thanks. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not even close to the same, but at my wedding I spaced out while the officiant was talking. When it got time for I do, I was just staring blankly out the window. My now wife got my attention and I had to ask what was going on. I said, I do. We didn't practice that part, sorry. This is adorable. My best friend got married recently and the groom was staring out the window while the officiant was talking and suddenly made a really shocked and scared face and started to look panicked and clearly wasn't listening. I was really concerned, but the rest of the ceremony went fine and it turns out he realized in that moment he had forgotten a piece of the paper he needed during the ceremony. From this, we can discover grooms, and men in relationships generally, could benefit from discreetly well-placed teleprompters. Now there is a business model. I've been at a wedding where the bride basically said no, I don't submit to my husband. They had to ask the officiant not to use any of that language when exchanging vows. He obviously didn't listen and she just crossed her arms and said, no, I do not, when that part of the vows came about. They still got married and as far as I know, they live happily together. That whole wedding weekend was a circus from beginning to end. I knew a guy here in Pittsburgh whose bride just didn't show up. He decided to go around and invite some local homeless folks to feed them with the catering he had paid for. He's a fairly wealthy dude, so I'm sure the food was no fire hall special either. Crappy thing, but a hell of a guy. Never, but my sister did mess up her lines. She got so nervous it took 10 minutes. The do comes after I. The confusion is understandable. Pretty close. My ex-father-in-law, a retired judge, was officiant at a friend's wedding. They wrote their own vows and didn't run them by him beforehand, but I can't remember exactly how they went. It was something like, with me, you will never be alone. Together, you need not fear sickness or loss. I won't ever leave your side. When they were done, he said, I'm sorry, I can't accept those vows. Legally speaking, I need a clear and affirmative statement of consent from both of you. And you phrased everything as a negative. Do you want to be married? Please answer in a clear, articulated statement of affirmative consent. They both said, I do, and had a little laugh, and that was that. They were married. Not me, but an old high school friend who was cheating before her wedding was getting married and lightning hit the steeple right after they said their vows. Falling rock damaged some cars parked on the street next to the church. They lasted about a year. I kept a piece of the steeple for a long time and then tossed it a few years later when I realized it was probably bad luck. I want to believe the piece of steeple had a purpose. It washed up on a beach somewhere where another troubled couple were honeymooning, became a murder weapon, went on its way to many great home-wrecking adventures, but only the doomed ones. I would binge-watch that series. Yes, but it was purely a mistake. But before the bride could process what she had said, the man passed out and hit his head on a church pew, splitting it wide open. The wedding was stopped and his head was sewn up after it was revealed that the bride indeed made a mistake. Needless to say, the groom was on pain meds and hitting the alcohol did not help. It was all a big laugh afterwards, same couple still married. 15 to 20 years now. When I was getting married, the officiant, clerk at the courthouse, an older gentleman who had been in the business long enough to marry my parents, asked me if I would take my wife to be my wife. After I said I do, he then turned to her and asked, and do you take John to be your wife? To which she smiled, not skipping a beat, and said, I take him to be my husband, yes. There was a pause where the clerk looked at her funny and then he covered his face. I said wife, didn't I? There was a nice round of laughter for us and our immediate family and friends, followed by his sincerest apologies. I'm constantly reminded I'm the most handsome wife in the world. This isn't an I do not situation, but at my wedding, my officiant, embarrassingly, confused me by asking questions like, will you take care of your wife forever? Will you hold her dear? Will you support her? Typical wedding questions? So I looked at my wife and said, I will. I immediately realized my mistake and stammered out, I do. I felt like an idiot, but hey, my wife gave me her right hand instead of her left for the wedding ring, so it all balanced out. I don't know if this was horrifically awkward from an audience perspective or a wedding full of cute rom-com-esque mistakes. I think it could have seemed either way. I seriously felt like saying it, but I didn't have the cojones. Fights started in the honeymoon and marriage lasted 1.3 years. If you feel like saying it on your wedding day, do it. It's so much easier than navigating a divorce. No, but almost. I made a Princess Bride reference when we were sitting down with our officiant for the first time. We chuckled and he never mentioned it again. Until the wedding day, he did the whole bit, marriage is what brings us together today, and so on. The whole speech. My family was cracking up, but neither she nor her family have ever seen the movie. Honestly, I thought I was going to go to bed drunk and single that night. My now husband started fidgeting during the sermonettes leading up to the exchanging of the vows. The minister asked if we were ready to exchange them, and he said, "Not yet." They didn't capture my reaction, nor did they get my daughters holding back my, in full dress blues, marine son. He leaned towards the minister and said he forgot the rings in the car. His son, who was taping the wedding, ran out and got them. My father-in-law yelled out, "He didn't get that from me." Afterwards, the minister and the wedding planner said that it had never happened before. Neither one asked my husband beforehand because he seemed so calm. Not at the wedding, but at the rehearsal dinner the night before. Bride and groom's mother got into a fight out in the front of the restaurant. The groom said, "I'm not marrying you until you apologize to my family and promise you'll fix this." The bride refused, groom called off the marriage. Bride decided to still have the reception and slept with the groom's roommate. Come to find out later she was only marrying him for his parents' money. Safe to say the groom dodged a bullet. This comes from a fellow I know who photographed weddings. The groom, at the reception after the wedding ceremony, giving his groom's speech to a packed reception hall, thanks the best man for sleeping with his wife the night before and walks out. I was in a wedding party that got super close to derailing. We coordinated a meetup before the ceremony for wedding pictures near some train tracks in an unfamiliar city. The groom didn't do the best job of communicating to the bride the actual location, causing the bride's side to be late. This sent the bride into a fit of rage, saying such colourful phrases as, "You always do this, I hate you," to, "I'm calling off the fricking wedding." This made for an incredibly awkward first look, mind you. While the bride was screaming bloody murder, the groom was off in the distance with his head down and back turned to us. Within moments, I got a text from him stating that he'd just adjusted his fantasy football lineup and was good to go. Pictures commenced and the wedding went off with a few more major hitches, including the bride crying and almost backing out moments before the walk. They expect their first child soon. I did see a couple signing marriage papers at the municipal building in my county, and then he decided after she signed that he wasn't really interested in being married. They talked it out, he got water dumped on him, and we all got a show. No, but I've seen someone object when the priest asked, did anyone have a reason as to why the marriage shouldn't go forth? And it was my drunk, troublemaking cousin who professed her love for the groom. She got thrown out. "I hope you were related to the bride." Not at the ceremony, but after the rehearsal dinner the night before, the bride saw the groom dancing with all her bridesmaids at the bar. Seemed like normal, fun, drunk stuff, but she flipped out and made a giant scene. Ended up sitting in the back seat of my car, my wife was in the wedding, bawling and refusing to talk to the groom. After like 30 seconds of people trying to talk sense into her, she told us to take her to her parents' house. We get there, take her inside, and leave. The next morning we find out the wedding is off. Apparently, the groom came over and she yelled at him, said she didn't love him, didn't want to go through with the wedding. The groom finally said, "Okay, fine." Then she turned it into, "He called off the wedding," and became the victim. She ended up keeping the gigantic ring, going on the expensive honeymoon with a friend, while her parents had to eat the cost of the ceremony and reception because it was too late to cancel. Rumors were it was around $50K. That afternoon, they brought around pieces of the wedding cake to everyone so it wouldn't go to waste. Our read on it was the bride never wanted to go through with it and this was her way out. I knew none of these people, so for me it was like watching a Jerry Springer episode. Me and another guy who no one knew just sat back and watched it all unfold, going, "This is awesome." The worst/best I've seen in person was a bride saying, "I need a minute," leaving and then coming back a minute later to say "I do." I was thoroughly confused, but it turns out she had been engaged before, and that man had died in a violent accident, and some memories came flooding back. My husband said, "Do I have to?" when he was asked to say his vows. The judge said, "Do it or you aren't getting married today." He did it. My husband thinks he's funny. He's not. During the rehearsal dinner, I said, "I yabba dabba doo." I was at a destination wedding where the bride called it off the night before. It was an awkward vacation for the two families for the rest of the week. One of the resort guests, not related to the wedding, wrote about it in their TripAdvisor review. I used to be a bartender and once had a rehearsal dinner where the groom found out that his younger brother, also a groomsman, had lost his virginity to the bride-to-be. The details of when the act had happened never made it to me, and despite my best detective work, I was never able to figure out whether or not the wedding actually went through. In my 16 years as a wedding photographer, I never had a "I don't" moment. But I did see many grooms and brides show up extremely late and very drunk. I had a lesbian couple break up on their honeymoon because one of them fooled around with the masseuse, and I had 2 couples break up the day before the wedding for cheating, and one bride that stumbled down the aisle after taking 3 Xanax with champagne. There are so many more. Oh, the stories I could tell. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.